Imagine if you have your vision as the car with the right team. Imagine how quick that vision will come into the footsteps. Something that was taking 5 years takes 3 months.
This morning is all about leadership and influence.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Insights Show. This morning, I'm standing in for Dr. Carl Hendricks. My name is Tessa Dooms, and we're here for the Insights series. Tuesdays are a good day for us to talk about social events, current events, political events, to understand our country better, to understand who we are in this country and what it is that we have to offer to South Africa. So this morning, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be in your space and to be with an amazing panel of guests that I'm going to introduce to you this morning. But yeah, let's start thinking about what it is that we want for our country. And this month is Freedom Month. So the month starts with the 1st of April, April Fool's Day. But we quickly have to forget that it's about fools, because we don't want to be foolish in this time in our country at the moment. And we want to remember that it's also Freedom Month. So the 27th of April marks this year 28 years since we first had our first democratic elections. And so in 1994, I wasn't old enough to remember the queues of people that were going to vote. But every time I see those pictures, I really wonder what that moment must have felt like for many people who were going to the ballot for the first time to cast a vote and be part of a democratic South Africa and a democratic moment. But since then, in the last 28 years, many of us who were alive at that time and have been growing up the 90s, in the 2000s, have been trying to make sense of what this freedom now means. Many people who are now eligible to vote, somebody actually said it's a little bit scary when you think about it, scary only for us old people, when you think about it, that there are now people who are eligible to vote who weren't even born in the year 2000.
Sure.
And so people who were born after the moment of freedom, I'm sure also have very different expectations of freedom. And so today we want to talk about what freedom means to us. We want to talk about what we've achieved and what freedom has given us, but maybe also what freedom has not been giving us over the last 28 years. And we also want to cast forward and say, what can we contribute to make our society more free? So I'm going to have a really great panel this morning. It's a feature that I'm calling the People's Panel. And so all of us have a view on this country of ours. All of us have a view of our experiences. And so this morning, our panel will take us through that. So please do send in your comments as you're watching, send in questions as you're watching, not just for me, but definitely for this panel of experts of society. That's what people are. We are all experts of our society. So this morning, I have with me 3 people on the People's Panel that I'll introduce. So on the far right, we have Stair. Stair is a community activist from Kliptown. Kliptown being the place where the Freedom Charter was originated. And so Stair does a lot of work with young people in the community, but also does a lot of work just generally making sure that people in the community are well and cared for. So Stair, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Great. And then we have Leandra, who you should all know very, very well. From the Inside Show. But Leandra, also, just as a young person in this country, your ability and your commitment to being engaged, starting conversations, leading, especially in a community like ours, I think is going to be really important to reflect on that, to reflect on what it looks like for people when we're looking for hope, when we're looking for community, and when we're coming together to actually do things constructively as we do in many church environments. So I'm quite excited to hear your views and your perspectives and how that influences the work that you've done in this community. And then finally, Joan, I'm going to say, I did start off today saying Auntie Joan, and then Auntie Joan said to me, no, it's Joan. so please don't think it's me, nah? I was told, I was given instructions.
She's very rude.
And so Joan de Klerk is also from the Eldorado Park community and has a history working in government, but also as an activist in the gender space. And I think it's really just going to be also important. I made this panel diverse in different ways, and one of them is intergenerationally. Yes. And so actually, John, I want to actually start with you today in this conversation because of that 1994 moment that brings us here to this being Freedom Month. And I assume that you were eligible to vote at the time. And so I was wondering what it did feel like for you, the 1994 moment. What position were you in your life at that point? And when you came to the ability to vote, what did it mean for you then? You know, did you feel more free in that moment than you had felt before?
Yeah, let me just take you back to 1990 when Mandela came to visit our school. It was around about 1990, 92. He had a special visit to Kliptown Secondary School where I was teaching at the time. I think the euphoria started there for us. We're entering a phase of freedom. And I had the opportunity not only to vote but to work at the first, sort of IC voting thing with Judge Krichler. It was just an amazing and interesting time. I don't think we thought about the freedoms at that time. It's just the idea of we are eligible to vote and now we're going to be free. We didn't think that freedom comes with limitations at the time. So I think everybody in 1994 thought we would be getting houses, we'd be living where we want to, we'll be going to schools where we want to. All this apartheid thing that we were living in is just going to disappear and life will just be great for everybody. I think that is the general idea of ordinary citizens. We are now free and so life will be just great. There's no more suffering and whatever else that we would have experienced.
So for you, it wasn't just being free from apartheid. It was also about having a very different life, being free to live a different kind of life, yeah?
Completely different kind of life, free to express myself, free to have my voice heard. As women, we know we don't always get our voices heard, so we thought that we'll be free to get our voices heard. We'll be free to enter schools that we've never entered before. I thought I would be able to go and work anywhere, teach anywhere, because I thought I was qualified to be able to work anywhere. And then life doesn't work that way. It doesn't matter how much experience you have or what your qualifications are. You are going to be competing for jobs, and you might not be the best person at the time for that particular job. So I think it comes with a bit of disappointment when you don't enter into particular jobs and you had this mindset that everything would just open up for you.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so Leandra, when you think about that moment versus maybe your first time thinking about yourself as somebody who's living in a free South Africa, growing up, what did freedom mean to you as you started to come to the idea that we are in a free South Africa?
So it's interesting that Joan should mention the ideology that was attached to this idea of freedom, and that what they were, I would the right correct term say promised, because obviously there was a promise made, or at least there was an idea of what that promise looked like, entering the promised land, that there would now be this open opportunities and this amalgamation of the cultures as you have been hearing about all these years. And so for me it was very different, because obviously I was born the year after Nelson Mandela was freed from prison. And so I think I was born into this new dawn of a template of what that freedom looked like. And I must admit that I had the privilege of enjoying many of these freedoms. So I went to, unlike my parents and their parents and your generation, Joan, that I was afforded the opportunity to go to a multiracial school. And for me, that is because I didn't understand what that meant and what the sacrifices entailed for me to be here. I didn't really think about it as freedom. I just thought about it as being normal.
You were going to school.
Exactly.
Not freedom.
And the thing is, earlier on, my parents didn't explain this to me. They didn't explain, because I think they wanted me, freedom for them, for me, was to have the most normal life as was possible at the time. So by 1994, I was about 3 or 4 years old by then. And I had not yet started school, but I was in preschool. I was in creche, daycare, or whatever you choose to call it.
Yeah.
And it was a multiracial environment. So I did not, from the very beginning of my educational journey, I did not know what separation of the races were.
And that's a really interesting experience in South Africa, because that means very early on,
Yes.
you were exposed to the South Africa that Joan had in mind.
Yeah.
And I'm going to come back to you, Joan, about what your reflection is on that. But Leandra, I just wanted to push you a little further on that.
Yes.
And how has that journey progressed? So you come into a society where you don't have to think about what freedom is, because you're experiencing the freedom that that the generation before
Yes.
had in mind.
Yes.
At what point do you start thinking about freedom for yourself? When did you start thinking, am I free? What does freedom mean? What does this democracy mean to me, and
Yeah.
am I experiencing it?
So the funny story is, I think like when I was about 6 or 7, I went to this school in the West End, and I was one of 3 children of color in the school. It was predominantly white. And again, I don't know of race. I don't see color, as they'd love to say. I really did not see color. I did not know what that meant. But now that I look back in retrospect, and I realize that everything that I did, the way that I started to speak, your accent changes. The teacher came to my mother one day and said, you need to please, you need to train Leandra to speak a certain way, because we don't understand her. Because obviously the R's were too hard, and the articulation was not on par with what proper education is, private school education is. So that's, but I didn't know these things because my parents shielded me from these things. But then when you start coloring in, you start using the peach colors. You don't want to use the brown colors. Something simple like that. Now looking in retrospect, I realized that there was an ideology that was built for me in the education system. And because our parents strive towards this private school, private elite lifestyle, that we become the recipients of that ideology. And so in the manifestation of what we do in our interactions, without my parents even having to tell me, that, listen, this is the situation that happened prior to our freedom and whatever, already I saw white as right. And it's a matter of, because there's already a template in place, it doesn't need to verbatimly be said to you. The fact that the system is there, you automatically you fall part of the system. And so white was right. So even the way I changed my accent, I wanted my hair a certain way, no curls, no curly, I want my hair straight, you know what I'm saying? And I'm of the lighter colors. So there's obviously, I'm and even in our families, the lighter ones, the fair skinned ones with the green eyes and the khlara, the straight hair, those ones are more premium or more supreme than the ones with a little more melanin, and without even having to be told, because of the system, you just automatically fall into this thing. And then I realized that I'm not free. Even though my parents have been shielding me from the past and the pains of the past, I am still a recipient of that pains, because I've just automatically fallen back into that same mindset. And that's when I realized, I think it was actually end of primary school. And there was a situation that happened at school. And obviously, it's again, I've only been to one school, so it was a predominantly white school. And when I say predominantly white, I mean the vast majority of the population was white. And the teachers were white, and the principal was white, and everybody was white except for the students, a couple of us. And then I realized that an incident happened at school, and the blame was basically put on the people of color. And the white kids seem to get away scot-free because their parents are on the board, and they are the
So it's not only
funders.
whiteness, it's also money.
Exactly. And that is when I realized, now looking back, I realized that money is power. And that's the reason why we're still not breaking forth. We're still not getting into this mode of freedom because we don't have the finances or the capital to do so.
And I want to come back to that question of money and economic freedom. The EFF has helped us with, really making that a normal concept of economic freedom versus political freedom. But what you say is so important about what freedom actually looks like in practice.
Yes.
Because for your parents, being free meant being in a white world or being able to choose to be in that world.
Yes.
But it didn't necessarily include how you were treated, freedom to be yourself, freedom to just be the girl that you were being raised to be in your mother's house or in your community. And that in itself is a lack of freedom.
Yes.
So you have freedom to do some things, but your freedom has these limitations that I don't think any of us expected, yeah?
Definitely.
I mean, that's a really good point. Stay, I wanted to bring you in here because besides the fact that this represents a wide range of experiences, I brought up the fact that you come from Kliptown where the Freedom Charter was signed. And we don't often make the link between the Freedom Charter and Freedom Day because Freedom Day is on the day of voting. Yeah. But certainly the idea that this was based on freedom is based on the fact that this charter was signed in the 50s that gave impetus to a shared idea of what freedom looks like. So when we go to that Freedom Charter, those kind of things about housing, land, the right to education, all of those things were put in as the promise of freedom. And so I want you to talk a bit about what it means to live in Kliptown today, the place where freedom was conceptualized, and what it means to you in the time that you lived in this country.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot. I think for me personally, it's a little bit difficult, where you understand that Kliptown is one of the places with a rich history where the Freedom Charter was adopted. It's difficult in a situation where come rain time, it's not a place where you can be simply to move. If you look at across Soweto Hotel, when you go across the railway line, there's a street which is called Union Road. When it's raining, it's impossible for people to move around. So you ask yourself, is this a kind of a freedom that our parents are talking about to say we are free? But when you look personally, we are not yet free because we don't still have those proper sanitation that were given promises to our parents, to our grandparents, We are not yet free. For me personally, I feel like the kind of a freedom that our parents fought for or wanted us to have, we don't have. Because that's the pain of living in an informal settlement where the Freedom Charter was adopted. You feel like people are having this kind of freedom that they speak about on a daily basis, but if you look at the monument where it is jotted down, most of the things that they're speaking about, we don't have. As much as you spoke about the kind of your land, your economic freedom, we don't have that kind of freedom, because if we were having that, we will be equal in our country today. But it's so very sadly. It take me back in a year, I think it was 92, during El Dorado Park Stadium, where we saw Mandela, when people were given hope. As a young person at the age of 10, I was like, wow, this is one of the greatest things, seeing a hero of people. You thought this will be a huge thing towards the people, a change that will make our country a better one. But still, we still have a long way to go, because for me, change is a process, but that process is not happening in our country. More especially if you look across and Kliptown, there's a lot that needs to change. It's a place without no school, no library, but it's a place of freedom. So you ask yourself, where's that kind of a freedom for people? Because if we look at the Freedom Charter, it speaks about education. If we have a library, it means that we'll have a better education. But if you don't have a library, then how do you qualify to become a better person in terms of your education, Your simple access of things, they are not accessible towards the people of Kliptown. So we still have a long way to go in terms of our freedom.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're honing in on one of those basic things about freedom. Yeah. Is that freedom needs to just be the ability to be a human.
True.
Who has basic human rights and has the ability to just have a basic, your basic needs met. And I think that's one of the things about Kliptown that really jars me, is that we're not talking here about like high level, freedoms. We're talking about basic things that should constitute, your ability to live in a society: housing, sanitation, a road that doesn't get clogged up so you can't walk in a street. I mean, there's a theorist, a philosopher in India. He's still alive now. And India is one of the most unequal societies in the world. It's very much like ours. His name is Amartya Sen. And Amartya Sen says that, in order to have a better society, you have to get rid of what he calls unfreedoms. And so he actually points at those things and he says those are it's not just a matter of it's an obstacle. He says it's unfreedom. It's unfreedom if somebody can't drink water. It's unfreedom if somebody can't get an education. You're taking them back. You're not just denying them something, you're actually moving backwards. And so I wanted to ask you, Stay, what does that do to the way people think about the country? If you're living in the place where the Freedom Charter was created, you're not having those basic freedoms. What do you think it has done for you and people in your community in terms of how you think about the country now going forward?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people have lost hope regarding our country. Because if you may check a lot of things, most of the times you'll find our leading party celebrating your Freedom Charter on the 27th of June. I think it is on the 26th of June where they are happy and excited. But if you go across the railway line, people are struggling to get proper sanitation, proper houses, proper roads, proper electricity. That's why people are also stealing electricity, which is we are using illegal electricity, which if you look, a lot of informal settlements which are established late compared to Kliptown as a place which was there long ago, around 1905, So you ask yourself, is this a kind of a democracy that we need in a country? Are we moving in a place where we're saying we'll be equal and be sharing everything that we said we'll be sharing amongst ourselves in a country as much as we live in South Africa? People are hopeless, honestly, to tell you the truth. Because if you don't give people hope with changes, then it becomes a problem. All the time you'll find people are fighting some just simple basic thing. They need proper houses, proper sanitation, proper road. I think that will fulfill their heart and make them feel happy to say they are part of the democratic country. But they don't feel that they are part of this democratic, because the kind of democracy that they're seeing it from different areas, and they're asking themselves, what has happened to us? More especially as people who are the custodian of the Freedom Charter, which is done in our own community. So that's how people are feeling.
Sure. And I mean, Auntie John, I want to come back to you on the question of the freedom in the form of the vote versus all of these other freedoms that we're talking about. So one of the things that has struck me in the last few months since the local government election is the idea that people have checked out of the voting process. They've checked out of voting democracy. So the stats tell us that last year in 2021 with the local government elections, there were about 40 million people over the age of 18 who were eligible to vote, who could have voted. Only 12 million people showed up. Only 12 million of us showed up. That's less than half by far.
Yeah.
What does that make you feel like as somebody who had that hope in the vote? And what do you attribute it to? Why do you think people are checking out of even something like the freedom to vote? How do we connect it to these realities that Leander and Stay have pointed out to us? And how do you feel about that as somebody who's seen the full spectrum of this thing? What it felt like to not have any freedom, the hope of that freedom and the ability to vote for something different, and the experience you're having now and we are all together sharing now.
Yeah, I think, I'm going to speak about El Dorado Park because that's the community that I see that's really, moving completely backwards. Apart from issues around drugs and so on, it's because there's such a large amount of young people that don't have access to jobs. So for me, when I voted in 1994, and I thought I would have access to all these wonderful things that we were promised, the promise of the land of milk and honey, and now nothing is happening. I think the youngsters don't feel the need to vote because there's nobody that firstly represents their needs, their voices, and or what they as young people would like to see happen in this country. So in El Dorado Park, yes, we might have a political party that has now taken over and started this colored, party that I don't agree with, but. Those are the people that voted because they thought that there would be change. But after the elections, I can tell you, the grass is very high in El Dorado Park. The potholes are full. So you've put people there with the hope that they would change your environment and your living space and so on in the township. But you come back after the elections that took place last year and nothing has changed. And it makes you wonder, did you put the right people there? Or is it worth you going to vote for those people the next time? Because every time you put somebody there, nothing changes. And I think that's the experience of a lot of people, and even in the circles where I am. I mean, I can openly say here, I am still for the Liberation Party, because that's the party that took me from apartheid to here. It's difficult to let go, of the people that liberated you. But I'm frustrated with the ANC, because they're not helping us in any way to move forward as a country. You would like to keep them there and with the hope that they would do better. But when you look at other political parties, there's nobody that can. So it puts you in this sort of catch-22 situation. I'm doomed if I do, I'm doomed if I don't. That I think that's the problem that we're sitting with.
John, I wanted to ask something about that liberation history a little bit. What is the role of communities during the 80s, like people who participated in the UDF and those kinds of things? Because I often wonder about that. I often wonder about where that energy that the mass democratic movement had set up for communities to participate in their own liberation, where do you think that went to? Because on the one hand, you're right, we're losing faith in voting. But on the other hand, we also have lost faith in ourselves and our ability to, step up and stand up and speak. Why do you think that we don't have that same energy anymore that we did, that your generation had, to get up, to fight for what it is that we want, to hold people, to hold the state to account, and to fix things on our own terms?
Okay, maybe I should just say that I don't think we've lost the energy, because you find pockets of community still driving, activism and so on. It's when once you've driven the activism and nothing is done, it sort of breaks you down. It's almost like somebody that's abused. You will fight the very first time and hope that things change, but you will stay hoping that things change. You will fight this fight. But eventually you exhausted with the fight because nothing is changing, and then you become extremely despondent. And I think South Africans and the communities are despondent with fighting. You are just saying to yourself, what's the use? I can rally people now, but am I really going to see change?
Yeah, and it goes to the question about who the political leaders are and whether we trust them. So even in our fight, do we trust that if we fight hard enough, and we win the fight in theory, we win the debate, but then if the people in power still don't change things, there's a sense of hopelessness there I can definitely feel. But Leander, I wanted to come back to you on that question of economic freedom that you raised.
Yeah.
What is your sense of why economic freedom didn't come? You're saying that when you were looking in that school environment and you started to realize, there's a class issue here. This is not just about race.
Yes.
This is about who has money. What are your views on what changing the economic system of the country would give us in terms of freedom?
So we celebrate the fact that, our country has been liberated from years of oppression. And it's years, it's not just under the apartheid oppression. It's colonial oppression. So it's more than 300 years of oppression. And I think that within these last 28 years, we have tried to right the wrongs. And I'm always going to go back to this. The last 25 years, we've tried to right the wrongs. I've got my reservations about that, about how that was managed and how it was actually ill-managed to right the wrongs of over 300 years of oppression. But I'm of the opinion that, and Professor Alan Busak was at a conference that I attended this past week, and he mentioned something so important, and he said that South Africa can never fully enjoy the benefits of its inheritance unless the rights have been wronged in a proper sense. So what he meant was, he said that, you know, we hear from a lot of our white peers that I'm not responsible for what my parents did, my grandparents did. And I'm not racist, and I agree with them. Many of them are not racist. But until there can come an admittance of the fact that land was stolen, right? And the fact that the benefits that you are enjoying now are as a result of what your forefathers did. And the fact that I'm not enjoying the benefits that my forefathers struggled for, that my forefathers were killed for, we can never move past this constant tension that will always loom in our country. We are never going to get past that. None of us are going to be free. Not even our white counterparts will be able to be free unless there's an admittance and unless the rights have been, and unless the wrongs have been righted, in the sense that there has to be compensation. You cannot continue for another 28 years without getting to the root cause of the issue, is that our people are still living in poverty and they are still economically oppressed. And we can never move past that. If the majority of our country, South Africa is the most unequal country in the world.
Yep.
Worldwide, I'm not just talking about in Africa or, you know, the most unequal third world country. I'm talking about the most unequal country in the world. After so many years of, every year on the 27th of April, we celebrate Freedom Day. Freedom Day for who? If in this day and age, unemployment rate is at its highest, especially amongst the youth, how is that freedom? Why am I still being oppressed in certain circles that I cannot enter into because I don't have the financial muscle to do so? How is that freedom? If I can't get a proper education and I have to drop out because there's not enough funds for me to get that education, how is that freedom 28 years after? So I don't understand when people say, yeah, but it's not my fault, I didn't do this. We are never going to move past, we need to start somewhere, you know? And I think that, to answer your question also, Tessa, why do you think that we are still in this place economically? When I look back at the Freedom Charter and I look what was stipulated and promised, it was so vague for me when I read through it, and I realize now that even that seems like a ploy, like it was some sort of a, I have no idea. I know that just before they basically wrote it into the Freedom Charter, they had to do it so quickly because the police came and they invaded the area that this was happening. The next day, it was on the Sunday, that I think it was in June.
Yes.
When it was, right, it was in June. And that Sunday, it was 2 days that the people gathered in Kliptown. Sure. And then the police just invaded and they had to just quickly, like, okay, guys, what we have discussed here, this is what is going, this is what is. And even that to me, and you know, you can call me a conspiracy theorist, but even that to me seems like a conspiracy. Like there was not enough time for us to actually get down. And because there were so many people, look, for me, that was the essence of democracy, where everybody could have a vote. But still, there was not enough time for us to properly deliberate, what does this mean to us? Because we didn't know what was our template of freedom.
Well, people would argue and say, you know, under those conditions, there wasn't enough time.
Yeah.
But once we got into writing a constitution, we had time. Yes. We had time to sit, we had time to reflect, we had time to deliberate. And there are a lot of people asking questions about whether the Constitution is still fit for purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the examples I'll make about that is actually the electoral bill, the electoral reform bill So 2 years ago, the Constitutional Court, there was a case won by the New Nation Movement. And the New Nation Movement got the Constitutional Court to declare the electoral bill and the electoral act in the country unconstitutional because it doesn't allow for independent candidates to run at provincial and national level.
Yeah.
And so that's there's constitutional issues around even the way we vote. So as that debate has been going on, L.B. Sachs, who was part of the writing of the Constitution, actually made a really important point, like last week, I think it was, when he said that actually the way our voting system happens now was supposed to be an interim arrangement when the Constitution was first created. That the idea of just having a party system and a PR system where only parties can contest was about the negotiated settlement of the time.
Yeah.
Because you wanted minorities to feel like they can still participate. But there was actually meant to be another conversation. And maybe we haven't revisited the Constitution and those conversations. We haven't revisited the Freedom Charter and the conversations about what kind of South Africa do we want now? And are those things that we decided on in 94, in 93, in the 1950s, are they fit for purpose now? I think you make an excellent point about those details. You know, we can, in principle, we can agree on land, but then we must talk about the details.
Exactly.
In principle, we can agree on the doors of education must be open. Now we must talk about the details. Fees Must Fall will tell us that. So I think there's definitely conversations to be had. Before I come back to you, Stay, I just want to just connect with our viewers and also say, in the next few minutes, I'm going to ask the team to show me some of the messages from people who are watching so that we can just share that as well. My name is Tessa Dooms. I'm standing in for Dr. Carl Hendricks on the Inside series. And today we have the People's Panel talking about what freedom means to us. And I think we've had a very robust conversation thus far. So Stay, I wanted to bring you back in on the question of economic freedom. I mean, we were talking earlier about this kind of idea of just the basic things. That's not even economic freedom. So where do you see us failing and where do you see opportunities for us to change when it comes to accessing economic freedom in the country?
I think Leanne has touched something very important. You know, when we say post-apartheid, a lot of people who are beneficiaries of apartheid, if they can bring back what belongs to the people, it's basically simple for us to be able to move forward and have a better democratic country. You know, for me, if we can have accessibility in terms of our economy, one, in terms of our mines, if they can be nationalized for people to be able to get their hands in terms of the national resources, it becomes basically simple. You know, sometimes we speak in terms of land. When people are saying, no, I'm not that kind of a person who hates people, I don't have racial issues. But the saddest part is that a person is sitting with close to 200 hectares of land. Why not you give the people the land so that in order for people to get a better place to stay, you know, it will be basically simple when people are giving back what belongs to the people for us to start to say, I think now we are moving into a better direction. Once we start becoming equal in terms of financial issues, you know, and be able to access a lot of things as a country, you know, whether you are a black, colored, you know, white, but at the same level and become equal, then we're saying we have a better freedom in terms of the country. So for me, economically, we are not yet free. Yes, we are free in terms of the movement, but economical, people who are having power, they dictate us and tell us which direction are we taking, you know. But if we're able to be accessing in terms of the economy, we will be having more power to voice out what we want. And one of the saddest things is that I think there's a change that needs to happen in our parliament. We can't be always looking at old age people sitting and tell us what to do. We need young people who can also speak out about what is happening on the ground. Because if you can have young people, then it's integration of young and old with new ideas and different views. But we are sitting with people who are still holding into the post a system that they were using to say we want a democratic country where people are going to be free and be able to get accessibility in terms of your RGPs. At some point, some people need just land and be able to build houses for themselves.
Right.
Not everyone wants to be getting an RGP. So, but the kind of land that we want, It's within the people who are still saying, no, I did not do that, my father did it. So if your father did not do that, give us the land, then we'll be able to move forward. It's basically simple.
You're starting to talk about solutions on the way forward, and that's where we're going to move to next. So let me just read from Mlungisi, who's been commenting quite a bit. I just want to read 2 comments. Firstly, he says he wasn't eligible in '94 to vote, but in 2010 he voted for the ANC, and all we got really is incomplete freedom, especially economic and social freedom. We've divided the economy, and we've got Sandton on the one side and Alexander on the other. And I think the other comment I wanted to read, it says, first, thanks for this. There's a rare, scarce experiences in the country. A majority of youth are engaged in nothing. And that doesn't build, it destroys. So I think those comments for me just show again, we can clearly see where we are. We can clearly see that there's something missing. There are missing links in this thing that we're calling freedom. And we need to start thinking about how we move forward. Leander, I wanted you to build on that, on what Stay was saying in terms of what can we start doing differently? How can we start innovating? How can we start changing things? You know, what are some of the things that are top of mind for you? Yeah. You know, Stay saying, let's get in there, number one, get more young people into the political space and into the place of governance, get more innovative ideas, change the way we think about housing and land. What are some of the things on your mind?
I definitely concur with what Stay was saying with regards to getting in. We need to change the structure of parliament and what it looks like. But I think that for young people, it needs to start with accountability. You can't just want to now come and take over and then you repeat the same cycles in just a different manner. So firstly, I think educating yourself and not making excuses of, because I did mention that, you know, it's difficult for us to get into the spaces of education because of finances, but there is access to education, other means to do so. There is the internet of things, where we've got so much better access to education. So educating yourself. The last time of the elections, I was saying the reason why many of the young people don't want to vote is because they also don't understand what their rights are. Many people don't. And I think the same thing with our parents. They don't really, we are repeating the cycles of this. Like, you know that there's a freedom charter, but you don't know what that entails. And if you continue the cycle of ignorance is bliss, we're going to continue having the next 28 years, we're going to be in the same situation, maybe even worse, at the rate that we're going at. And I think that what needs to happen is we first need to educate ourselves, understand what our rights are, keep the people in our communities accountable. Like Auntie Joan was saying, that there's a specific political party that the people voted into. It's a new political party. They voted this party into power because they believe in this party's manifestos. Now you go back and you need to keep these people accountable, but understand, how do you keep them accountable? Understand what your rights are, your democratic rights and your basic human rights, and then you keep those people accountable. But I also think that above and beyond that, there needs to be a change in our judiciary system, because there's no use of us knowing our rights, there's no use of us fighting here on the ground, but then our very own judiciary system fails us. So I think that there also needs to be, we need to relook, as much as we need to relook at the Constitution, we also need to relook at our legal bodies and what does our rights mean to us, because rights is freedom. For me, having basic human rights, like you were saying, that is the beginning of freedom. But if we can't even achieve that, how are we going to move forward? So my advice to young people is, especially young people, because I can only speak from that perspective, from a standpoint of experience, is to understand what your rights are, understand what that means to you, and be responsible and be accountable and keep each other accountable. Because a lot of the times now young people are of the mindset of, whatever, you know, I'm just gonna YOLO, you only live once, living young, wild and free. And then come a couple of years when you're sitting in a situation where you now just wild and not very free, and you're not young anymore, and then there's just wildness happening around you. Now you want to come and point fingers. So it needs to start with us, and that is my
you're raising a thing that is one of my pain points when it comes to youth development work. So sadly, I have to admit, I have now been a youth development worker for almost 20 years.
Wow.
That makes me very sad. But one of the pain points for me has been this question of when young people do come in, is it just, as we would say, new wine in old skin, you know, where we actually not changing very much. I mean, even the women's movement has this thing where you say, yes, having women in the room and representation is great, but sometimes the very women who come into the room change nothing. Or start fighting against the very things that you would want, the gender activists put them there to do and said, guys, this is the mission, go and do it. And so it's not just enough to have young people in the room. It's not just enough to have new people in the room. It must be new people who are coming with a new mission, a new way of doing things, and who are willing to change the system and fight the system. And what we've often seen, particularly in establishment politics, in the big political parties, is young people coming in, and number one, they're coming in off the back of older people who now can tell them what to do, because the older person created the space for me. Now I must, I must do what the older person or the person who gave me the space told me to do. But more importantly, when they get there, I mean, they go from young to old quickly. I'm just like, dude, you're in your 20s, you're sounding like the 60-year-old politician. You might as well be the 60-year-old politician. You're no longer with young people. You're now telling us, young people are the problem. I'm just like, how did you become so old so quickly? It's bizarre to me. But I think that there's definitely a set of conversations we need to have, and that young people need to have amongst themselves about what accountability looks like, and what would make young people support young people. Because something I worry about is that young people aren't ready to support each other, because they're also like looking at each other going, can I trust you to not go and take the opportunity that you're given and mess it around?
Just on that, Tessa, I think the Zondo Commission and the unearthing of corruption, which we have known has been happening for a very long time in this country. It's just now it's come to some sort of apex where people can see that, we're trying to deal with corruption. But it's been there since the start of the democracy. There's been the arms deal, there's been this and that and that. There's issues around land that, if you just look at who got the farms, it's politicians and so on. I think for me, it's firstly dealing with corruption decisively. Because when you root out corruption, you can then start empowering people. But when you empower young people, you first need to teach them skills so that they can help themselves. Our focus in this country is getting our youngsters into university. You come out with a degree, but you have no skill. So you don't know how to apply that degree. So our technical colleges, the TVET colleges, are completely misdirected for me. They should be focusing on skills. If you take Australia, for example, when they started immigrating people, they immigrated people with skills, boilermakers, plumbers, and that's how their economy took up, if you just look at that. But we don't have the same. It's so difficult to find a boilermaker, to find a plumber, they are not qualified to do the work. They can do it because some have taught themselves that skill. But if we focus on those kinds of skills and move away from, everybody must be a graduate, because now you can't be placed being a graduate.
And just before we continue, John, I think that also, we forget that a plumber doesn't need a job. A plumber is a job.
Yes.
Once you know how to do plumbing, people can call you to their house tomorrow to come and do plumbing and pay you. You don't need to wait for somebody to employ you. And that's some of what we've missed out with apprenticeships, with learnerships.
All of those things, yes.
We're not seeing that skills transfer, as you say. Somebody was saying to me that even the idea of master apprenticeships, those people are old now. The people who actually know how to do apprenticeships, that have the training, they're actually all old now, because we somehow just stopped.
They're all in their 60s. I mean, they close to retirement, or others have already retired. I mean, those are the kind of things I think we need to shift from. And we preach this message to our child: you need to get into university because you won't get a job. And then we sit with a high number of unemployed university graduates. But if we had started teaching them a skill, they would have been working for themselves and contributing to the economy. So we're not giving them that.
Even teachers' colleges and nursing colleges were skills colleges.
Colleges, yes.
Now we focus on the university as the place for that, where the theory outweighs sometimes just the skill of teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah, I come from the school where I went to college to do teaching. It's a very practical kind of teaching course. So when you walk into the classroom, you understand the children. You are a completely different kind of teacher because you've done so much practice teaching kids in a particular way from primary school to high school, depending on the course that you've chosen. We don't have that. You come out with a university university degree. You've done limited practice teaching, and you are going to teach children almost your age. It becomes extremely difficult.
Definitely.
I was merely 21 when I started teaching, but I could manage children that were 18. Remember how kids always went to school late and whatever else. 18 in grade 9, but you could manage almost your peers as a teacher.
Yeah, that's such a big lesson because, again, if we don't do things right, if we just do them to tick the boxes, then we end up having lots of money going into lots of places, but it's not producing, the right kind of things. We're about to wrap up, and I wanted us to end on this point, and we've only got about 10 minutes left. But I'm going to ask each of you to answer a question. So I'm from an organization called Rivonia Circle. And at Rivonia Circle, we ask a fundamental question. We've been trying to figure out how to ask this, and then it happened, and we're like, that makes sense. But we ask, how do we create South Africa version 2.0? So, the democratic moment gives us version 1 of this new South Africa. And we started saying, maybe South Africa needs an upgrade. We upgrade phones, we upgrade cars. Maybe we need an upgrade. And so I want us just to talk about what that version of South Africa for each of us would look like. What would an upgraded, different, better South Africa look like for you? And not necessarily how we get there, but just if you had to describe it, what would be some of the key fundamentals in South Africa version 2.0, the upgrade? So Stay, I'll start with you, and then we'll give everyone a chance to give their version.
I think for me now, Auntie Joan has already started something that we also losing in our own communities. When we used to go to school, there were technical schools where they will take you and teach you how to build at an early age. But these days, our kids are not being exposed to kind of education. So these are part of the important thing that we need to say, a skill center where kids are going to be teach how to build, how to become a plumber, how to become a boiler maker. Because we can't be relying only on becoming your doctors, your nurses. Because at some point, we need those kind of people in our own communities. Because we can't be all doctors. And that's one of the things that we fail to understand as people in this country. To say, not everyone can be a doctor. Not everyone can be a nurse. There are people who need to come and build in this country. There are people who need to come and become boiler makers. That's why our country has high rate of people who are from different countries with your boiler making. So at the end of the day, we are trying to say our foreign people are chowing our jobs, which is, if you look, they're coming with skills and proper documentation in terms of their skill. But do we have that kind of thing? We don't. So for me, I think a South Africa with a 2.0, it should be a South Africa where people are free and able to access a lot of things. And I would love to see a South Africa where South African mostly are the ones who are doing your marketing, where we speak about our free market, where people are able to sell everything that they know. Because one of the things that I've noticed is that we as South African are always good at talking, but we are afraid of implementing things. So if you can be able to start implementing things, it becomes simple for us to grow our own economy. Instead of saying foreign people are taking their money from our country to their countries. So if you look, these people are here to make money. They are not here to fight with anyone. So what is it that we can best learn from them is that, okay, this is how they make money. How best can we upgrade ourselves and make money also, instead of us complaining and not doing anything?
Compete with them.
Exactly.
Compete and win.
Yes. So I think that's one of the kind of the things that we need. A situation where we be able to do things our own, and check, can't we fight our own government and saying, no, in the Freedom Charter, you guys promised that you'll give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I think knowing more in terms of our rights, because I think Leanne was saying something which was very important. A lot of people don't understand their right, but they say, I have right. At some point when you tell a person that as much as you have right, you also have responsibility to take care of those rights. The only time people will tell you about their rights is say, I have a right to speak. So you ask a question, so what's your responsibility as a person who's speaking? Make sure that you speak something that's sensible in order for us to understand you, you know. So that will be very important if people can understand their right and also know that they have responsibility. If I say we need to make sure that street need to be repaired, it's my responsibility to do follow-up with our own government to say, we have put a complaint, we see there's no response regarding our street, then we can have a better South Africa.
Thanks. Leandra?
So, in an ideal utopian world, I would say just press the reset button on everything, but we know that that's not possible. I would honestly say that, but based on what we know now, not just everybody goes back to like archaic days and, you know, Stone Age days where we now have to start from scratch. I'm talking about based on what we know now and the lessons that we have learned over the years, if we can reset, but we can't do that. And I'm not talking about the great reset either, because just now people are like, are you one of those people? But I think that we need to deal with the root causes. For me, the people who are responsible for the oppression, right, including the children thereof and the line of ancestry that is benefiting off of the backs of other people's misfortune. I think that we need to get into that space and have a conversation there. I think that should be the starting point for me personally. And not just the I'm sorry, come here on TV and apologize for all the things. I'm not asking for your apology. I'm asking for you to take responsibility. Because we are taking responsibility for the ills that our forefathers have done. And we are dealing with it. And if we can do it, I think that even our white peers and counterparts can do the same thing. And I think that there's not enough remorse in that sense. So I'm going to be very open and honest about about how I feel. I think that we need to start there. Once we can get that right and sort out the land issue properly. So I hear what you say with Julius Malema, and he highlighted, you know, he's making us now vice aware of this the land issue. But this land with compensation, expropriation without compensation, I don't agree completely with that, because I think that also has, for me, it will just create an ongoing effect of the cycle continuing. But I think that if we can have open and honest dialogue and conversations constructively, and not just like, okay, this is the Freedom Charter and everybody go ahead and do what you feel, it's open for interpretation. No, there should be a clear understanding of what that means to us. And once we get that right, I think that we can move forward. But also we need to deal with this thing of corruption properly, because there's no use we reset everything and people are making amends for their wrongs, and then we've got a situation of corruption, because the argument is, yeah, but what about 28 years? You guys had 28 years and look what you are doing with the 28 years, because that's also an argument that arises. But I think that we need to deal effectively with corruption. And again, it goes back to our judiciary, you know, our legal body needs to take responsibility as well and get rid of all the rotten apples. And so I think that for me, that would be
great.
Awesome.
Joan, you have the last word today. What's the South Africa of your dreams? What's the upgrade we need? Upgrade us.
You know, I've jotted down a few things. The first one is, I don't think we have politicians, but we don't have the political will for change. So we first need to have the political will for change to be able to change to a new version. So all talk and papers will not make any difference. And as we currently stand, I don't think our politicians have the political will to change the country to a better version of what we are experiencing now.
Definitely.
And the second thing that is, you have to deal with corruption in a decisive manner, which we are not willing to do, because too many of our politicians and people in private sector and other spaces have benefited from corruption.
Yes.
So it's difficult to deal with corruption if you've benefited for so long. So you would rather preserve it in some form. But the third thing that I wanted to say is, if we need to reduce the size of our parliament. Our money can go to proper programming for our people, which is, you don't need 300 and something seats. If you look at any parliament all over the world, I think ours is massive in comparison to those. You don't need that. So we need to consider, reducing the number of seats we have and so on, so that when you have a group of people that are there, those are the people that will carry out the mandate of the people.
Right.
So we don't have that. And then my passion is gender and social justice. So I would like to see social justice being really, taken seriously, reducing things like gender-based violence in the country.
Yes.
And I don't think our judicial system is bad. I think it's overburdened. And we need to find other ways of, and innovative ways of making our justice system work better for us.
Yeah.
And and then of course I have to talk about women. Our women in our country are still seen as a secondary citizen, as far as I'm concerned. We are not equal to men as yet. And if we don't have that equality of voice and decision making, then we're never going to see change. We'll always be sort of submissive to our male partners, and we need to start there to claim our spaces, claim our voices, and really take a responsibility of moving the country forward with our decisions that we see best for our country.
I mean, I have to wrap it there, but thank you so much for the first People's Panel that I've run, and I think this has been just an extraordinary conversation in many ways. Mlungisi on the chat, I think, ends us off really well when he says, we're tired of talk, it's time for action.
Yeah.
And I really think, I always say that talk is also an important thing because we have to find each other. But once we do, we need to move to action as fast as we can and not wait for anybody. We can't wait for the politicians to get it right. We have to be part of the solutions we seek. We have to start building those solutions in our community. We have to start being accountable, holding others accountable, and we have to figure out how we all start to take action and make freedom meaningful. Freedom is not just a word. It can't just be a word. If freedom is just a word, then we've lost the plot. But we need to make freedom practical, and I think we are in a good course if we start really talking about what our role is to do that. So thank you so much for tuning into the Insights show. Dr. Carl Hendricks will be back next week and take this conversation forward. But thank you so much for everybody for your time and the panel for your great insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Imagine if you have your vision as the car with the right team. Imagine how quick that vision will come into the footsteps. Something that was taking 5 years takes 3 months.
This morning is all about leadership and influence.